Are you an ambitious leader ready to break through limiting beliefs, align with your purpose, and thrive in your career without sacrificing your well-being or postponing your true desires? I'm Diana Ordonez, certified high-performance coach and your host. Each week, we'll dive into actionable insights and research-based strategies to help you unlock clarity, build unshakable confidence, and take courageous action toward a life of impact and fulfillment. If you're ready to overcome fear, embrace growth, and step boldly into your next level, you're in the right place. Let's create a life filled with courage and purpose together. Hi, everybody. I am here with Moises Santos today, and we are going to be talking all things leadership, mindset, relationships. I actually met Moises dancing, and when we quickly realized we were doing a lot of the same work with coaching, we started to work together. And then after working together for about a year, you took a complete sharp turn and went into corporate. And Moises has done this for the third time. And so I thought it would be so interesting to have him on, especially as a coach, to talk about major career shifts. First starting in education, then going into entrepreneurship and coaching, then corporate, and now starting a whole new venture in January where you'll be working with coaches on a more remote basis. And I want you to talk about that too, and how you made these decisions and how you transitioned through these things, what your learnings were, and how you work with people to really move them through old paradigms to new paradigms. Because one of the things that I learned from you was when I took part in the renewed mindset program that you had, it shifted me in a big way because I had never quite connected with my body that way, understood the connection between my body and mind in that way, where I was, pushed to the brink to really uncover those underlying beliefs and what was keeping me stuck. And so shortly after that, actually, was when I ran my half marathon. I just felt completely renewed. And so why don't you tell me about this latest, change you're making and how you kind of came to these different stages in your career where you made these shifts and, what you learned, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast, and congratulations to launching this. And
Oh, thank you so much.
I wish all the success for you. I also want the audience to know that I almost killed Diana. You don't remember that? So renewed mindset was something pretty interesting, and because of that experience, we did change a lot. But I'm glad that it did transform something in your life. That was the intention. And that was part of my journey.
You just
So
reminded me. When you said that, I almost killed it. I was like, well, I mean, I was in a lot of tears, but then I remembered. That's right. That's
I
also when
almost
I
killed
got
you.
rhabdomyolysis.
Yes. You were in the hospital. Yes.
Yes,
I
that's
was
right.
terrified for I was just terrified for that whole experience.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
it did change a lot of the way that Rancis and I approached it, and just kind of it actually created the idea of Life Lab, which is what's happening in January. Believe it or not, it did stem from that because just to give context, Renewed Mindset is a 2-day workshop that's super intense. It's kind of like boot camp, Hell Week, Army stuff, but we kind of use that philosophy of pushing the body to reprogram your mind. And this is what the military uses. That's how they reprogram and create soldiers. Except we're giving the client the opportunity to reprogram the way they see themselves and how they want to see themselves and what they're capable of doing. But we understood from that experience, Diana, that people need to be prepared for that. And you can't just throw them in because everybody has different limitations, everybody has different physical capabilities. And that spawned Life Lab. And Life Lab was just a set of curriculum, a curriculum which had a set of courses in it that would prepare somebody to experience renewed mindset. And that started building all the curriculums that Rancis and I did, which then I made a turn into corporate. Uh, and then now we're going back into Life Lab. But going back to your original question in terms of like what sparked the transition was a lot of those experiences. We had Vida Project for, 7 years. We did a lot of great work. Uh, but I would say that one of the areas of opportunity for me as an entrepreneur was to learn about business operations. And I had an opportunity to go into a corporate company, run a center of doctors, clinical assistants, a sales team, a lab team, and an admin team, totaling about 22 people and a $10 million budget. And I wanted to see if I was capable of doing that. And in that time frame, in the year and a half that I spent there, I felt like I was very successful in developing an amazing culture, connecting with people the way we did at Vida Project, transforming their lives from a managerial standpoint, and also, leading the center through one of the most the toughest economic times that it's had seen. And I think it was a great success. And I think now the reason I shifted back into entrepreneurship was two main reasons. One, I felt that I was prepared and I proven to myself that I was capable of leading a successful business. And the second thing was I wanted to go back to something that had meaning for me and purpose. And that was really to make an impact on every single life that I encounter. And now I'm going back into entrepreneurship, and we're gonna create a digital platform that transforms lives, and it's gonna be called Life Lab.
That's so exciting. That's so exciting. I didn't know that that incident was what sparked Life Lab. That's interesting. I'm actually finding that out just on this call now. So I'm glad
Yeah.
it good came out of it. I mean, listen, I had never like really lifted ever. Like for the most part, I was just a runner. So for anyone on the call, rhabdomyolysis is typically not something only like marathon runners and like people that are lifting really heavy, and I was not lifting very heavy. It was just I was pushed beyond, my capabilities at the time. And what I remember from that experience is like I was not going to like give in, because I felt like, okay, I say mind over matter and it's like time to like walk the talk, right? Like and so I do feel like I definitely pushed beyond like listening to my body, but it also helped me break a lot of mental barriers. Obviously, I don't recommend people go out there and get rhabdomyolysis,
Yeah, don't do that.
but I will say like I had much better appreciation for, how our bodies inform the way we think, and how we bring that into just our mindset in our struggles outside of physical struggles, right? Like our challenges. And what I love about what you said is, you felt confident after you did this thing that you felt like you couldn't do. One of the things that I work with my clients on constantly is about challenging ourselves beyond what we think we're capable of in order to get that confidence that we are looking for, rather than waiting to have the confidence to do the difficult thing that we don't think we can do. And so that's part of, renewed mindset. And it's part of what you're talking about now is seeking out the thing that feels impossible in order to overcome and, get these new ways of thinking. And I love what you said about purpose, right? Because a lot of people get burnt out and they feel like they're now going through the motions, and they're like, how did I get here? And I wanted to talk about, how did you like know it was time for that shift? Like you were ready and, this was no longer in alignment. And how can you kind of advise people through, when is it my mindset that is the problem? And when is it the actual situation that I'm no longer in alignment with?
That's a really good question. Um, I would say for me, so like you said earlier, there were three shifts in my life. First one was from teaching to entrepreneurship. And uh, a lot of people don't know this, but Rancis was my coach during that time when I was a teacher. I had gone through a lot of difficulties with relationships, self perception, confidence issues, things like that, which Rancis uh, taught me a lot of those ideas or concepts, philosophical concepts in terms of stoicism and just acceptance. Um, and it really translated to my basketball team because I was a basketball coach for 10 years. And every single year I would go with these kids and I'd spend tons of hours with them, these young men. And we'd only get to like the first or second round of the playoffs. And then one year I decided that, I was going to win a championship. I was just like, no, it's time to win. Um, and I took these ideas, these concepts of mindset, and I instilled it in my team. And that year we won a championship. And I knew how powerful this was because it was just, I was like, oh, I can shift the way that I think. And if I shift the way that I think, um, I'll be able to change my behavior and the behavior of others. So we won the championship that year. And then we decided, like, hey, these are concepts that should be taught in a school.
Mhm.
So then we joined this contest called XQ Super Schools that was made by Microsoft, Bill Gates, and there were like 250 teams. We had to build a proposal. We had to do this whole thing. It was me, Rancis, and two other teachers that I worked with. And we got to the final round. So there were like six teams left. They were only going to choose four. We were in the top six left in the country. We did not win, but we got to the final round. So we lost a $10 million
So
grant.
close.
It was a big failure. It sucked. It felt so bad. Uh,
Oh.
but it taught me something. It was just like, oh, I want to do something more meaningful, more impactful. Um, and I saw like how much value it had because we won the championship and like it changed the lives of so many young men. Like for example, uh, my best player on that same team is playing for Division I college right now. He's in his last year, fourth year. Uh, Possibilities of him going pro or semi-pro exist. And it was because of those moments. And we still talk to today. He comes to me, I coach him through some things. And it just shows like how powerful these concepts are. So then I knew I was like, all right, I got to leave. I got to do this. And when I went into entrepreneurship, I got punched in the face with the reality of entrepreneurship, which is a whole different mindset. And all the lessons I learned um, in that area is what we created curriculums out of, which is what we called Vida Project at that time. And it translates to life project because we see your life as a continuous project that you're building upon. Uh, and yeah, that created that shift for me. I think back to your question in terms of like, how do you know the difference? Um, for me, I really had a deep understanding of emotions in my body. I'm a really emotional person, and I've always um, judged myself for being an emotional person. I'm a person that cries easily. I'm a person that laughs easily. Like I can be very serious, and my emotions can go from one end to another very quick. And I always thought that was a negative thing uh,
Mm.
until I understood the power of it. And then
Mhm.
that wasn't until I understood what emotions or the purpose of emotions are. And they're a suggestion. And it's your
Mhm.
body trying to tell you something. And
Mhm.
when you connect your thoughts to your emotion and you have coherence in that, I like to call it head heart coherence. Um, you get alignment. And when you have that alignment, you kind of understand there's this clarity that just comes and you say, okay, I know what I have to do. And there were
Mm.
a few moments that I had that in my life where I knew exactly what I had to do. I just saw the connections.
I love what you're saying about being so connected with your emotions. And honestly, that is one of the like common characteristics in a lot of my clients. And you attract what you are a little bit. So that was something that I also like experienced a lot of judgment around. And then this is an interesting topic too when we talk about being kind of like sensitive to energy or overly empathetic. or just really in tune with our emotions. Because a lot of times it's interpreted as like this negative thing to be that sensitive, right? And as you said, I've come to kind of embrace that it's a superpower. And when I have clients that struggle with this, and many of them do, because many of the high performers are very passionate about the work that they do, and they're very like committed to doing their best work, and so they tend to have this common uh characteristic of being very in tune with their emotions. And so they feel the hard stuff very, very heavy. And then they also feel the joy in a big, big way. And so what I love to talk about with emotions is kind of like this pendulum, right? Of you're only going to have the emotional capacity to experience joy to the same kind of height that you're able to experience or depth that you're able to experience your sorrows, your
Mhm.
darkness, right? Because it is kind of like that spectrum of emotion that if you refuse to feel your feelings, or you aren't as sensitive to them or in touch with them, you are also not going to experience the depth of joy, as because you're not able to experience the depth of that I guess grief or pain, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to actually piggyback on your point. The way that emotions, I understood emotions, and this really transformed the way that I behaved or reacted to things, because I believe there's a reaction and there's a response.
Mm-hmm.
The reaction is the space or the time between your thought and your
Mm-hmm.
emotion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the shorter the time between your thought and your emotion tends to be more of a reaction, the behavior that you get out
Mm-hmm.
of it. A response is when you can really create the space between your thought and your emotion, the physiological sensations that you get. So the way I thought about emotions were, the RPMs on a car,
Okay.
right? So if you were to categorize every emotion, each of them have their own RPMs, right? And when you get to
Mm-hmm.
that red line point, this is the area that your behavior or that space gets really small because you're not used to the physiological sensations of, let's say, anger in that range. So some people, like for me, if I let myself get angry, and anger was a thing that I repressed for a lot of my
Mm-hmm.
life because my dad was a captain in the military. He was an angry young man, and I was not allowed to be angry. So my frustrations came out in tears. I would cry.
Mm-hmm.
So there,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very used to crying, but in terms of expressing anger, I would repress a lot of those things. So now, if I really get angry, it almost feels like physiologically, like things are glitching. Like it feels almost dissociative. And
Mm-hmm.
I understood that in that point, I had to let myself get angry to understand those physiological sensations so that I understand how to create space in those moments and then choose my
Mm-hmm.
behavior that I
Mm-hmm.
want to demonstrate or express in that moment. And because I learned how to do that, or just that concept of I'm redlining in this emotion, all right, I need to find a way to create space, that allowed me to empathize with how people feel. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
skill is what made me into a very good leader in the current
Mm-hmm.
position that I'm in the corporate job. I was able to understand people's emotions because I experienced them myself.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh my God, we're going deep on emotions today.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, it's important to talk about because I think a lot of people avoid emotions. When you talk about like emotions that we suppress, that resonates with me, and it resonates with a lot of clients of mine too, because we perceive certain emotions as negative because of something in our lives that kind of flagged to us this is not a safe emotion. So when you talk about anger, yeah, for me, it wasn't that I wasn't allowed to be angry, but I perceived that anger meant it was not safe, like something bad was going to happen because anytime that anger was present, there was screaming or yelling, or big scary things were happening. And so anger is not good. That means someone's going to get hurt, right? And so what we don't understand, if we don't pay attention, is that we create these like underlying beliefs about things from traumatic experiences that we perceive aren't traumatic because it wasn't that bad. We have all this judgment about it. And to a child that doesn't have control, doesn't understand what's happening, doesn't have, awareness about emotional regulation or emotional intelligence, like to that child, yes, even the things that aren't, near death experiences to your nervous system, it felt
Mm,
like near death, right? And so we have these judgments about whether we should or shouldn't feel about a certain way about things, or whether we um, did or didn't have, enough trauma to cause us to behave this way or feel this way. And a lot of the biggest changes that we experience are when we overcome that shame and guilt and just allow ourselves to feel all the things and then get curious about them, because like you said, like our emotions carry a message for us,
mm,
and I think that's so important, uh, especially for men, right? Like men tend to be told very young that they shouldn't be emotional or experience, like they're not supposed to experience all the feelings, right?
yeah, no,
So
that's very true. Uh,
yeah, so tell me about how, because I talk about it a lot, but I think every coach is able to communicate things differently, and maybe something that you say could resonate for someone in a different way. How do you get to that point? Because you talked about that redlining, right? And that's like, that means my body does not think this is safe. And basically what you're doing by I need to experience this more often is teaching it, okay, the more times I experience this in a safe space and I tell like I'm teaching myself it's safe to feel this way, the more comfortable I'm able to feel it. But then also the more I'm going to be able to get insights about what it needs, right? So why don't you kind of talk through the process of like in this job, right? Like what did it feel like in your body? How do you kind of coach people through connecting with their body so that they can listen, so that they can explore and get curious and get that clarity that you're talking about?
mm. Uh, so I think for me, the basis of like my philosophy comes from a doctor, a psychologist. His name is Dr. Alan Watkins, and he very much like the space we're in. He coaches high performer CEOs, and his basis for every human behavior is that it's physiological. And if you take physiological stimuli in the body, which is your heart rate, your respiration, your eye dilation, all of those things, you package those things up together, that creates an emotion, which is energy in motion, right? From there, based on our experiences, life experiences, our traumas, our uh, pleasant moments in life, we label these emotions based on the
Mhm.
perception of what is happening in our life. So that label then creates a specific mindset or an outlook on the world. And then that outlook determines your behavior. And the way I see it is that we're a set of patterns based on our stories, because those are data points that we've experienced that then created an emotional response in the body. And if you look at the brain, you have the amygdala, which is responsible for emotional regulation, and it's right next to the hippocampus, which is responsible for long-term memory. So it's so funny that they're so close to each other because they're very tightly closed. And the way that I would use this with teachers is like, how many of you remember your first kiss? And it's like everybody raises their hands. And it's because typically when you have your first kiss, it's like one of the most exciting times of your youth. And it's so physiologically intense that you remember it even if it was good, or if it was bad. It's either way, you're going to remember it.
Mm.
So if you take this response, you create learnings in the body, you create learnings in the brain. So for me, I approach everything in my life with that understanding. Now, do I have control over it all the time? No, because like I said before, each emotion has its own range that you're good at. And I believe that you're only as good, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall back to your level of training. So
Mm.
each emotion has a level of training that you experience. And I would argue, and I don't know if there's data out there or research on it, but I would argue that people who tend to work out, who are athletic,
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
a deeper understanding of their body and their mindset because when you push your body in a physiological way, it creates emotional responses. And if you do that
Mm.
in a game, if you do that, running 10 miles, 15 miles, the thoughts and the emotions and the doubts and everything that comes out in those experiences
Mhm.
really tell you a lot about how you speak to yourself.
Mhm.
So with that basis, I take that everywhere with me now in my personal relationships, in my work relationships. I know when someone says something to me and I feel this thing in my stomach and in my heart, I know that it's telling me something. What I'm not doing is creating conclusions from it. I say, oh,
Mhm.
this is interesting. I feel
Mm.
triggered by this. Why?
Mhm. Mhm.
I feel maybe I'm feeling manipulated. Okay, let me be more curious about this emotion. And that
Mhm.
allows me to come to it from a space of open mind or like openness and kindness, not only to myself but to the person that I'm engaging with. And I think this is
Mhm.
a real thing that leaders need to understand. It's just
Mhm.
like your perspective is not always the right perspective. You have to be curious as to
Mhm.
what's happening. And there are moments that you have to make decisions as leaders, right? Where speed is important, where these
Mhm.
decisions are important, and you're going to have to deal with the consequences. But I think emotions allow us to really understand the mindset that we have to making decisions and the mindset of others, how they impact those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that put up my little
Hmm.
antennas was like you said that it's not always the right perspective.
Yeah.
And so for two reasons that came up, I'm like, oh, right, that's interesting because I've always heard you say there is no right or wrong.
Hmm.
Uh-huh. And then
Hmm.
the other reason I thought of it kind of like picked up my ears is because one of the things we work on with high performers is to get uh, influence or to be able to influence people in a powerful way, right? Even as coaches, one of the things that we need to learn is to how to influence someone to change their mindset, to change their perspective. And so when you think about when you said our perspective may not be the right perspective, I definitely thought about, well, our perspective may not be their perspective, right?
Hmm.
And then it's also our perspective may not be in alignment with who they want to become. And
Hmm.
that's what makes it like the right perspective. But you may very well have a perspective that's going to serve that person in the greatest way.
Hmm.
And yet it won't be in alignment with like who they want to become or what values they hold. And so they will likely not be open to your perspective. And so what I love about what you said is that aspect of getting curious over, attaching some judgment to any of their perspectives or any of the emotions that they're feeling in the moment, because that curiosity allows you to then influence them in a bigger way, because now you're able to start with understanding them, seeing them, acknowledging them, validating them, which is the actual thing that allows us to influence that person to see it in a different way. Because if you don't understand, validate, see, and all of that, you're not going to be able to talk to them about how this new perspective can allow them to move to a place that they actually want to be, right? Like their
Hmm.
desires, their, view of who they want to eventually become. And so when you talk about though, the feelings is like a lot of times high performers they think, right? Like they think they know who they want to be, what goals they have, and all of that. And so when you're having these discussions, what and I came face to face with this all the time early on, was like I thought I could get there with just my mind. And so I would just like, the feelings don't matter. I like, who cares? And there's some truth to, mind over matter, right? Um, and talk about, why you can't do it all with the mind.
Mm,
Like why you need that additional insight.
mm-hmm,
And when you're in those situations where the emotions come up, why it's important to dive into that and not go straight to like, what are you
mm-hmm,
thinking?
mm-hmm. I mean, we're gonna go into some deep,
Yeah.
deep philosophical stuff,
I
but
could feel it. Yeah.
so it stems from the idea of being right. Uh, and I don't believe in right and wrong, but there's aspect of me which everybody has, is called the ego. And the ego only exists because it believes in some predictability or certainty that it has from its identity. So me, Moses, who I am right now, has to have some version of right in order to feel certain about where I'm going. So a lot of the times where people
Mhm.
have, like what you said, is, oh, they have this idea or construct of who they want to be, what their goals are. It may be true to them. And
Mhm.
that's their right. That's their certainty that they're going for. Uh, and a lot of the times, like I do resonate with the idea of like mind over matter. It is important to have that. And the reason I say that is because emotions are a suggestion. They're not truth, right? Your
Mhm.
your thoughts are a suggestion.
Mhm.
They're not truth. It's an idea. It's a set of data points that you've collected from your senses, your eyes, your ears, your mouth, taste, touch, what all those things. You've collected all this data
Mhm.
and your brain is processing it
Right.
consciously and unconsciously. There's data that you can't see, that you can't attach meaning to, that your brain is processing. And there's your body is reacting to that data and it's
Mhm.
telling you something, right? It's very similarly like the example that Rancis used is like, imagine like a bag rolled in front of you so fast it just went by you. Automatically, your brain thinks it's a mouse. Why? Why did it think it was a creature? Why did it think? And then you look over and it's a bag, a paper bag that just went across you. Well, it collected data in that moment and it created a meaning or a point of certainty or truth for you to react in some way, defend yourself, freeze, fly, like whatever the case may be. And I think it's important to understand that yes, your emotions matter, but at the same time, it's a data point. It's not truth. And going back to this idea of being curious is being curious about the data that you're collecting, analyzing it, and then understanding that even when you come to a conclusion, it's still an assumption, and you have to
Mhm.
make a decision based on that assumption, which then is either going to move you forward or move you back in a direction or vision that you want to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So many things about what you said. Because I never maybe necessarily thought about the ego in that way.
Mhm,
Um, and what I concluded from that is like, oh, right, the ego is what wants to keep us safe,
mhm,
because predictability means I'm safe. If
mhm,
I know what's going to happen, I feel safe with that. And so that goes back to the nervous system, and it goes back to that's the system that collects all of this input. That's where the data comes from, right? Like all our surroundings. And what I wanted to say about yes, it is a suggestion, our emotion, like our feelings, right? It's like it's all kind of in passing. We can either respond to it or not. And like you said, emotions are energy in motion. And when we have things that happen to us that are highly traumatic, and it doesn't matter if we perceive that they should have been traumatic or not, if they were highly traumatic to our nervous systems at a time where we couldn't handle it, like our childhood, what happens is if we suppress those emotions because it's unsafe to feel them or because we think that there's something wrong with us for feeling them, what happens is that that energy actually gets stuck in our bodies, right? And so
Mhm.
that's why sometimes we do kind of need to dig deeper and get curious about it so that we can actually process that out in our bodies and like feel those things. And the reason I think you know, things like running and dancing and all the ways that we engage our bodies um, is so important in these types of situations too, is because that energy has to go somewhere, right? Like you have to kind of move it out of your body. And when you keep suppressing it, you keep not being able to like kind of move through that trigger, right? Like you can't, and
Mhm.
sometimes it means like doing it in the moment, right? Like now I'm teaching it that it's safe, but sometimes you do kind of need to feel through those emotions that you didn't get to in your past. And
Mhm.
by continuing not to get curious, by continuing to kind of try to plow through it, you're not actually like processing it. And what was has been interesting for me in my journey is I always thought like, okay, I'm gonna cry about it. Then what? Like that doesn't fit my problem.
Uh,
But actually, what I found is it really is physiological. Like you do not have to do much more than that. Like
mhm.
in a lot of ways, yes, you kind of have to work through the meaning of what it means to you. But a lot of what it is feel that compassion and empathy for the feeling that you didn't get to feel when it happened, and then it kind of is able to dissipate. And I thought that that's been so interesting for me, and it's hard to kind of work with clients through that because it almost I know I experienced it, like that fear that if I go there, I'm not going to be able to come out of it. And it's just been mind-blowing the way sometimes you just cry about it or move through it or scream through it, whatever the energy needs to be released. And then it's like the weight kind of it starts to dissipate.
Yeah.
And so the last thing that I got from what you said is that that paper bag, right? Like that you see fully past feels like a threat. And what that reminded me of is like our eyes are actually like there's studies of the eyes that show that we actually fill in a lot of the blanks, right? Like we don't actually know what we're actually seeing.
Seeing. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And
It was
I
like
thought that
25% or something like that.
mind blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that's so mind blowing, right? That's where all those illusion exercises come from and stuff. And so when we kind of think about that, it's like, of course, we all have different perceptions of the same thing, right? Like, of course. And
Mhm.
so I always say empathy is such a powerful tool in leadership because you just have to realize you are not seeing things from the same lens.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that we work on too is like, well, what lens do I want to see things through, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so talk about, you talked a little bit about like when somebody says something to you and your heart beats faster or you feel like weight on your chest and like those types of things in your career, right? Like what were the patterns that you observed like right before you were ready to shift?
Mhm.
What
Yeah.
what did what did that look like and how did you know that it was not, okay, I'm thinking about this in the negative way versus
Mhm.
um like this is not what I really want to align myself with anymore.
It goes back to that point of like emotions, that energy emotion. Whenever I feel like a big shift needs to happen, um, it's very much it's a state of depression that I go into. Yeah, before. Like I'll end up ruminating a lot about things. I'll end up being anxious, and then there's this depression. And then what I understood from that was there was a quote that Jim Carrey says. It's like depression is your body asking for deep rest because it's
Mm,
tired of being something that it's not. So it's almost like you're acting.
mhm,
And I think for me, one of the most important things has always been authenticity. And when I feel like
mhm.
I'm not doing something authentic to my meaning, um, then it creates these emotions. A lot of the times, what I would do previously was completely ignore it. It's like, nope,
Right.
go through it. And then you just get exhausted. You get burnt out. You get tired. Uh, you feel anxious all the time. It takes a toll on your relationships with your family, your loved ones. Uh, and I when I noticed this pattern, it's like, okay, I'm faster at doing it now. And because of I'm faster at doing it, I take immediate action instead of just kind of sulking in it. That doesn't necessarily help, right? Uh, I think I put a post out the other day where I heard about a reel where suffering is the obsession with yourself. Everything that you suffer is how something is impacting you as an individual. And going back to that ego statement, it's like, am I really doing something that is meaningful to me? This identity that I hold of myself. It's not to say that I'm not capable of staying in a corporate job or staying in teaching. I can shift my identity to those things. But one of my core values has always been authenticity. And because of that, I know what I want to do, the impact that I want to have in this world. And if I'm not living that, then my body will retaliate. My
Yeah.
body will retaliate. And it's going to say, no, man, like you got to do something different. That's how I knew when to make these shifts. You know, I knew when I was a teacher and it was the year after we won the championship and I was still coaching basketball and I just did not have that same energy for basketball, which is something that I played since I was 5 years old. And I knew I was like, this is weird. I don't love coaching anymore. Why? And it was because like I saw myself doing something bigger, something that had a bigger impact, and I had to leave to do that. So yeah, those shifts, it shows up in my body.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of what I call congruence,
Hmm.
right? Congruence with your values is kind of like what makes you, when you're not in congruence, is what makes you, like I said, like you said, depressed, because it's like your body will naturally want to be in congruence. Like anytime that you are behaving in a way that's not in congruence with who you believe yourself to be, you will be like kind of pushed in the direction of change. And it's like one of the things that I ask clients is like, rather than like, why am I feeling this way? Is like, how do I feel the way that I want to feel? Like, how do, so this case, right? Like one of the questions I might ask somebody is, okay, how could you be in congruence at this job?
Mm.
Right. And so if I had asked you that, what would you have said? Like,
I mean, I had to do that at one point. So it's in the dental industry. And
uh-huh,
I remember I would have these disassociative states when I first started because I'm just like looking at teeth and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, what am I doing here? Like, it's
ah,
just so I had an identity crisis in that moment because I was
mm,
just like, what? I don't know what I'm doing right now. Like, I don't know. I felt like not confident at all in this space. And I was like, how am I going to connect myself to this and bring what I know into
uh-huh,
this space? And it was when I first had my first team meeting. And I remember I was really nervous. I was just like, why am I so nervous? I do this public speaking stuff all the time. I spoke in front of like hundreds of teachers, and I'm like, here, there's a team of 22, and my heart's beating fast. You know, like why? And in the first team meeting, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to be completely vulnerable and transparent with everything. And I talked about like my philosophy in terms of making decisions, which is that Alan Watkins model. I talked about my experience in coaching and how I'm going to bring it into the space. And I was nervous, and I told them I was nervous, and they could hear it in my voice. And when I did all that, they all trusted me instantly. And when I saw, I was like, oh, my work as a coach can influence people, and I don't need to know about teeth to make an
Mhm.
impact here. Right. So I
Mhm.
ended up seeing myself as a facilitator of decisions that needed to be made. And I would use the people around me and their expertise to grow the business, to create better efficiencies, to develop a better culture. I used them. I took myself out of it as like
Mhm.
I needed to know. I didn't have to know. And so in that moment, I created that congruence. I developed it for myself because I was having a full-blown identity crisis, and I had to develop that system. And then now I feel very comfortable in that space. I actually know a lot about teeth. I feel like I'm a doctor. I can tell you exactly what's happening. No, I can't. Uh, but um, I feel very comfortable in that space. And because I feel comfortable in this space, that translated to this confidence of like, oh, I'm capable of going into any space and doing this.
Mhm.
I'm capable of like most people don't know, I'm also opening a coffee shop. Like I don't know jack shit about coffee other than I like it and it tastes good. Uh,
Yeah.
but I'm like I can learn really fast. I learned about healthcare in a year and a half, and I became a high performer in a year and a half.
Mhm.
I was like, I can run a coffee shop. I can learn about coffee. I can help people in certain ways.
Mhm.
I can go into coaching. It's just you create that shift, but it has to be, I feel for me, the person has to be able to understand their emotional states. And they have to kind of use that energy, because it's energy and motion, use that energy to create that congruence. The moment you
Mhm.
start denying it, the moment you're going to
Mm.
create suffering. That's my belief, because the moment I started to deny these emotions, like, no, I have to stay in this job. No, I can't quit. No, I'm going to feel like a failure. All these negative thoughts came out of it. But my body was telling me, hey, it's time. It's time to move on. There's
Mm.
not a responsibility to these people. These people have grown tremendously with you in this state, and they're ready to do this on their own. They don't need you anymore.
Mhm.
And that's when I was like, okay, that's my ego talking. That's my ego wanting to feel validated, wanted to feel
Mm.
important. And I was like, no, I have to move on. And it was like, it felt like a breakup, to be honest, leaving this
Yeah.
job, because I really love these people.
Yeah.
I love everybody there. But my body was saying, no, it's time to move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you talk about it feeling like a breakup, it is like anytime you make a big major change like that, there's grief that's going to take place, right? And when I heard you talk about ruminating, right? Like I had once listened to this podcast about rumination because there was times like I definitely felt like I was in that wheel of rumination. And what was interesting about it is that he talked about any time that you are grieving something, you are going to try to make sense of it. Like your brain is naturally like in shock and trying to make sense of what was happening to you. And so sometimes it's like you have to let your body process out the grief. And part of that is like constantly replaying everything that happened to make sense of it in some way. And so when you talk about like depression and rumination and there is grief that comes with that. And so when you say, anytime that you like deny your emotions, you are going to enter this state of depression. It is because you're denying your body's ability to go through the grieving, natural grieving process. And for you, I mean, you were closing up shop with Vida Project as you knew it. And so there's so much to grieve there. And now that you've, established yourself in this place and you've created relationships, it's natural, even if it's no longer in alignment, for you to have to grieve that. And so when people think about grief, they usually associate it with, someone passing away, but there's so much to grieve in any major change, whether it be a career shift, even like moving homes, like, you know what I mean? Your body is naturally looking for similarities, like, so that it feels safe. And it's interesting your perspective on your ego, because some of the times that I coach people through you're not taking action is because you're so centered on what does this mean about me? And
Mhm.
clearly that's the ego. And so when you shifted from that to how do I serve, which is the opposite of the ego, then it's not about you at all. It's about, how do you show up in the world as someone that is, making a difference for other people. And there, as I said that, I even heard like an aspect of ego, right? Like I want to
Mhm.
feel like I am making a difference. So maybe tap into that a little bit. Like, how do you know, when it's it's ego versus service, or versus, kind of this concept of meaning, or I don't know if it's like oneness, but that is kind of what drives us when we look for purpose and fulfillment, is making an impact,
Mhm.
right? And so,
Yeah, I would say that ego always exists. It's always
okay.
going to be there. It's how much of an understanding do you have of your ego? I
Hmm.
always hated this example that Rancis would use, but it makes so much sense. Um, it makes so much sense because it's like your ego is like a dog, right? Like it's a dog. You have dogs that are, you'll take them out on a walk, they're pulling you, barking at everybody, going crazy. Everything has to be about them, right? And then you have
Okay.
a dog that a person will come up to you and they just like hide, tail goes between their legs, they hide behind you. And then you have this dog that listens to every single command that you say, right? You say, hey, stand next to me. Oh, go attack. Stay back. Stand down, right? Like it just knows it's in alignment with you. So a lot of the times what I understood was, for example, people don't think as shy people to have an ego. But if you read Eckhart Tolle's book,
Hmm.
he talks about how being shy is a feeling of inferiority in an environment. And I was like, oh, wow, that is ego. So ego is always present. It's there, even when you think that you're not being egotistical, because this idea of being egotistical or having ego is this person that wants to absorb the room and be superior and be obnoxious, as like we like to think of it. But even when you decide to serve, when you decide to do something for someone else, it's not just for that person, it's for you too. You feel good about it after you do a good deed. And that's even that thought process is like, I did something good. That's the ego talking. But the question becomes like, what's the intent? And this goes back to like what we spoke about before, which is like, what are your values?
Mhm.
You can understand what something means to you if it's aligned with your values. If you have clarity behind your values,
Mhm.
then you can say, oh, my ego is aligned with these values. And there creates this construct where you can draw boundaries with other people. You can create safe spaces with other people. You can do good deeds and feel great about it. You can do great deeds and feel bad about it at the same time. Like it's just, it's, I'm getting really abstract in this ego talk because ego is so abstract. But ego is in alignment with you. That's how I see ego. And when you don't have an alignment with your values, you're going to see your ego react in certain ways. It's going to get upset easily. It's going to cry easily. It's going to be all these different things because it has to have meaning to who you are for some reason, and this identity of what you are and who you are and what you've been through and what you've done and all these data points. But ego is always evolving, it's always changing, it's changing with you, but it always goes back to these core values that you've, as a person, I feel there's a responsibility as a human being that you discover them and
Mhm.
understand because they guide your every decision.
Mhm. So
It was really abstract. I'm sorry.
no, no, no. You know me. I like to go deep. When I just wanted to ask, as I heard you, I was like, is it the ego or is it the self?
Well, I feel that they're the same. Ego and self are is ego is the construct. The way I see ego is like it's an avatar of who you think you are. Like you create a video game, you create an avatar. You know how on the iPhone you can create who you are. That's the perception of you. Have you ever created one of those and to say, give it to somebody, be like, does that
Does
look
it
like
look like
me?
me? Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll be like, kind of. And it's like, what's the person sees you differently, but that's how you see yourself. So that's your avatar. And if you can change your hair and you can change your hat and you can change your glasses and you can change, like you can change all these things about you on that avatar. And in your world, I believe that we do that. As we continue to develop new experiences in our life, our avatar begins to change. And that's you, the image of yourself in your head. And that's your.
Oh my God, we could go super deep on this. Like last time we talked, we went kind of deep on this. So, because I'm thinking about like the soul, right? Is the self. Like your soul
Mm,
is what makes you you,
hmm.
right? Versus anybody else. And last time we talked about how AI has could it or could it not have the capacity to have emotions, right? But it doesn't have a soul. And so I don't want to go like off the rails here.
I think we're gonna have to do a part two. And the reason
Yeah.
I'm saying this is because this is a whole like different topic.
Yeah.
And then I also got a therapy appointment at 2
Ah.
that I gotta drive to in North Bergen. So it's a little bit away. So I want to go into it so bad. Like my ego wants to go into it so bad. I just know that we can be here for another 2 hours. This is like a Joe Rogan podcast.
No, you know what? We probably should at some point have a conversation about that because there is um meaning, like there is value in understanding this yourself, right? Like that is part of what coaches do is allow you a space to really explore yourself on a deep level, understand what drives you, what is actually important to you, what are your values, right? Um, and part of that is like what aspects of my perception of who I am are really who I am versus just thoughts I'm having or just like how I'm trying to manage other
But
people's perceptions of who I am.
here's a
And
question.
just,
Do you
yeah.
really know who you are? Ever?
Yeah. I mean,
Greek philosopher said, know thyself.
it's know thyself.
Know thyself. It's because you never know yourself. You're always discovering a new part of you because you're always changing.
Yes, I was gonna say because the only constant in life is change. And I think that's also part of, this aspect of okay, at some point you may have outgrown a career because guess what? You're always changing.
Mm-hmm.
You're always evolving. You've learned new skills. And maybe for you, it was you learned a new skill that gave you new confidence to do the things in the coaching world that you thought, that you felt limited by before. I heard you say like there was some limiting beliefs about whether you were capable of doing that. And to be
Mm-hmm.
able to, okay, I now believe I can do that. All of a sudden, maybe you felt more empowered to do the thing you really wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like you couldn't not do it because it is such a moving force for you because it's something you're so passionate about. And I love that you're, honoring that. I love that you're launching in January. Why don't we, save that for next time we sit down. But tell us about, what is this new project?
Mm,
And how do people get in touch with you? How does it work? I love that you're opening a coffee shop. You can maybe
mhm,
talk a little bit, get a plug on what to expect that's different from this coffee shop, because I know
mhm.
it has aspects of your, your mission to connect people and talk these deep conversations. So let's kind of wrap it there.
Okay. So the project that I'm going back into with Rancis is called Life Lab. It's going to be held on the school platform, and it's a digital platform for therapeutic services. So everything that has to do with improving your life or transforming your life, from the physical aspect, from beauty and wellness, from therapeutic like coaching services. Um, and it's going to be $65 a month, and the goal is to make it accessible to everybody. We know that inflation is high. We know that therapy is very expensive. We know that people don't have access to those things. And our
Mhm.
goal has always been to transform over 1 million lives. The
Mhm.
problem has always been, how can we do that at an accessible price point where people feel that they can do it and still thrive financially in their career, with their relationships? So this
Mhm.
platform is going to offer one-on-one coaching services for $65, uh, including courses, weekly seminar, Q&A sessions, monthly challenges, and even in-person events, where people can essentially join a community of others who are also trying to thrive and
Mhm.
really change their life. So we're doing that with Lisa Perez, or
Mhm.
Lisa Dominguez Perez. I don't know
Dominguez
if she
now.
hyphenated it. Alex, her husband. They all Perez now that I think about it. Rancis Perez, Lisa Perez, and Alex Perez, and then myself. They're all coaches. We're going to contribute a bunch of different services to that. And the future is to bring on other coaches as well that can contribute, develop courses, and their inputs. And we're super excited about it because we think with this team, we're going to deliver a lot of value and impact a lot of lives.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
And I imagine a lot of your events are going to be held at your coffee shop.
Yeah. So the coffee shop is something that I thought about years ago. So the story with coffee was, I never drank coffee. I actually had a traumatic story with coffee.
Oh
I'll
boy.
make it short. My father he taught me how to play basketball. And when I was like in seventh grade, he wanted me to drink coffee because he thought it'd make me more alert in the game. And
Boy.
I was like, no, I don't want to drink coffee. And he's like, you're going to drink this coffee. He basically
Boy.
forced me to drink coffee, and I hated the taste. I was like, oh, this is disgusting. And I like cried, and I was just like upset that he would make me do this. Um, and then fast forward to, 2020, I decided to go into this idea of fasting and detachment of self and detachment of food. Um, so I did research on fasting, and I found out that coffee and tea, the only things that don't stimulate the gut while you're fasting. Uh, so I was on my third day, 72 hours out of a 5-day fast. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna have coffee. So I tasted it, and I had the best experience of my life. Like, it was just like I did so much work. I was like, thought clarity it was like this new drug that I was introduced. So then I started trying different coffees, and I've always gone to. We've gone there too. Is Roasted in Fort Lee. Became friends with the owner. I said one day I'm gonna open one of these. This was like about 4 years ago. And yeah, this year I just decided, yeah, you know what? I think I'm just gonna open one of these. And that's something that I've always dreamed of having. Just like I do these things in my head where I'm like, I'm gonna DJ one day. And I have Casa de Salsa that I opened up. It was one of the biggest socials in Jersey. I'm gonna open up a coffee shop one day and do this. And it just kind of just happens because it's something that I just like constantly think about. So the coffee shop is, I think, what coffee does. It's a great medium for people to connect. It's always been that. You see people go to coffee shops, they connect, they have great conversations, and I think it just aligns with coaching. I mean, I would love to just
Mhm.
coach and drink coffee all day.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Yeah, and, I also love what you said about having that clarity that like one day that I'm going to do this, right? The part of coaching is just getting people to connect with that so
Mm-hmm.
that they can bring it to reality, right? There's so many things like that that I've also experienced, and it's like even this podcast. You thought I had already launched the podcast.
Yeah, I thought you already did it.
Been talking about it so long. Yeah,
Well, maybe I just saw it before you did it.
there you go.
I saw you do it before you did it.
You just get premonitions.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, awesome, awesome. I don't know if we have, I think you have to go. I think there's so
Yeah.
much for us to talk about. You talked about like decision making and how you know, approach the team. I wanted to talk a little bit maybe next time about how you change the culture of that team and how relationships are so important and how we approach relationships and how you had to make some really difficult decisions about who stays and who goes and I think that it would be great to have you back on and kind of cover some of that. That would be awesome.
Let me know. I would love to do that.
That's awesome. Okay, so we'll put that on
Uh,
the calendar then.
all right.
All
Cool.
right, Moses, thanks so much for your time
Thank
today.
you.
This was great. I always love talking these things and sharing that with someone that also, is so passionate about these topics and helping people. And I hope, it brought a lot of insights to people that maybe hadn't looked at their emotions from this perspective and how it drives us and the ego. And, I think all these topics are so meaningful and valuable for people that are trying to get to know themselves on a deeper level, understand how they got to where they are, and move through that to find their next venture, kind of like you're doing now. So
Well, I love that you're
appreciate it.
holding this space, and I thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. All right. Till next time. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Courage and Purpose. I hope today's insights inspired you to take bold action and align your life and career with what truly matters to you. If you're ready to dive deeper, I invite you to download my free Action Indicator Assessment, a powerful tool to help you uncover what's holding you back and take the next step towards clarity and confidence. Just visit www.lifeonpurpose.coach/action indicator to get started today. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use a little extra courage on their journey. Until next time, stay true to your purpose, lead with courage, and keep thriving. I'll see you in the next episode.